It began with a scent, my friend, a message carried on the air to Marcus Thompson. It wasn't the sweet breath of pine you dream of in the Cascade Range, but something more primal, something that coiled deep in his soul and reached for a memory of violence he thought he'd buried in Vietnam. It was the scent of damp earth of life, ending woven with a musk he had no name for. At 68 years, with knees that ached with the memory of every mile and a heart that rarely found peace in sleep, he knew to listen to the whispers of his own spirit. And in that moment, it was crying out in alarm. He stood there on the porch of his small cabin, the warmth of his coffee fading in his hand as he gazed into the line of trees. The whole world, it seemed, had fallen silent for him. The birds had hushed their songs, the wind held its breath. There was only that scent growing like a premonition, and the profound, unnerving feeling of being an intruder in his own life, seen by eyes that belonged to the wild in a way he never could. You see, just 3 days before the sky had been torn by the sound of helicopters, their blades beating a relentless, searching rhythm over the wilderness. They felt like something military, or men who worked in the shadows of power. They had visited his skies before, but never with such desperate purpose, never grazing the edges of his sanctuary. He had reached out asking the local sheriff what secret they were hunting. The boy on the phone had hesitated, a silence that spoke louder than the lie he offered about a simple training exercise. Marcus, my dear, had known the taste of deceit from men far more skilled than a young deputy with a new badge. And so it came to this. The scent of fear on the wind, a world holding its breath, and impressions left in the soft earth of his north pasture, imprints of a soul far larger and stranger than any bear that had ever walked those woods. I can feel your doubt, my friend, the thought that a man alone with his memories in the deep woods might conjure ghosts. But you must understand, Marcus Thompson was a man who had learned the language of the jungle in Da Nang, who had read the stories left in broken twigs and damp earth by men who wished him gone from this world. He knew the subtle difference between the shadows in his mind and the ones that truly move in the trees. And this was terribly real. Before I share the rest of this story, this piece of his heart, I ask you for a small kindness. If you feel a connection to these whispers from the wild, I hope you'll stay with me to listen to more tales that question the world we think we know, because I promise you, what became of Marcus that day will change the way you see the shadows for a long, long time. So there he was, his coffee forgotten, his gaze lost in the trees. The morning sun spilled over the ridge like liquid gold, a breathtaking beauty that felt like a lie. It was like dressing a wound in silk, a lovely surface hiding the ache and decay just beneath. He gently placed the mug on the worn wood of the porch rail and turned, crossing the threshold back into the quiet heart of his home, to retrieve his rifle. The little cabin that Marcus called home was a simple, honest place, a single room holding a loft for sleep, a stove for warmth, and propane for his meals. There was no connection to the noisy world outside, only the soft crackle of an AM radio and the silent promise of books he'd carried with him for 40 years. His beloved Linda had been gone 6 years, taken by a sickness that stole her away in just 8 months. His daughter Sarah lived a life of her own in Seattle with children who knew him only as a distant photograph. The silence in that cabin was a physical thing, my friend. It filled the spaces her laughter once occupied, pressing on him until the very walls seemed to ache with a love that had nowhere left to go. He had sought this solitude after her last breath, after the funeral. He let go of their home in Portland, taking the pieces left after the bills of her illness and trading them for 40 acres of quiet wilderness at the very end of a forgotten road. The world called it rustic. To Marcus, it was a sanctuary, a place far enough away that the clamor of humanity might finally fade to a whisper. The rifle was a Remington, 700, a 30-06, a ghost from his time in the Corps. He cared for it with a gentle reverence, keeping it clean and ready, though its voice was rarely needed here. It had spoken to a few coyotes and a couple of bears who learned the meaning of boundaries, but mostly it stood silent in the corner, a solemn vow he prayed he would never have to fulfill. Until this morning, perhaps. He checked its heart, fed it 5 rounds, and with his binoculars in hand, stepped back into the charged air. That scent was a living thing now, beckoning him north toward the gentle slope that led to Thunder Creek. The journey would be half a mile a distance his knees cried out against. But an old voice sharp in his mind after 50 years reminded him that pain was just a letting go. Some lessons, my dear, become the very marrow of who you are. The walk was a slow conversation with time. He was no longer the boy of 20, nor the man of 50, and each step was a quiet reminder. Yet he moved with a grace learned in another more dangerous forest, his feet falling like secrets on the earth. He watched the world around him, breathing shallowly against that overwhelming scent, a ghost in his own woods. Thunder Creek was just a whisper of its summer self murmuring over smooth stones that shifted beneath his boots. But the far bank was wounded, torn open by something immense that had passed through so recently that the earth still wept into its footprints. He knelt, quieting the ache in his bones, and laid his hand within one of the impressions as if to feel its pulse. It was a story told in mud, 18 inches of length, 10 of width. 5 toes so clear, so very much like a man's, and yet the shape was a dream of humanity, stretched and deepened. Whatever soul had made this mark, he knew must carry the weight of at least 500 pounds upon the earth. He knew the old stories, of course. Everyone who loves the deep woods does. Sasquatch, Bigfoot. His Linda used to gently tease him, saying he'd come to the mountains just to find that myth. He'd always met her words with a soft laugh. But you know, my friend, all stories are born from a seed of truth. And as he knelt there, breathing in that terrible sacred scent, surrounded by the profound silence, the laughter had faded from his heart. Then a sound shattered the quiet from up the creek. It was not the gentle parting of leaves by a deer, but the sound of a heart breaking a body in panicked flight. The rifle came to his shoulder as if it had a will of its own, his finger resting near its trigger, his eye searching the world through a circle of glass. And then it appeared, bursting from the shelter of the trees. A form that walked on 2 legs, draped in dark hair, moving with a desperate speed. And its shadow 50 yards behind was cast by 2 men in the gear of modern hunters, their rifles held with a cold, practiced certainty that spoke of a dark education. The creature, and oh, his heart knew what it was, even as his mind fought against the truth faltered in the shallow water. A leg betrayed it, and it fell with a heavy splash, the creek embracing it. Even from 100 yards, Marcus could see the life-stains, dark blossoms of red blooming on its shoulder and leg. The hunters closed in their movements, swift and without feeling. One spoke into a radio, and though the words were lost to the distance, Marcus knew the cold tone of finality. The end of the hunt was near. The prize was won. From the water the creature struggled, trying to rise, failing and trying once more. It lifted a great hand, not in anger, my love, but in a gesture that spoke of surrender, or perhaps even a prayer. And then its face turned, and across the space that separated them, its eyes found Marcus. He had spent a lifetime reading the stories told in the eyes of others, the eyes of young men in a jungle far from home, as they prepared to die. The eyes of his Linda. When her pain was a universe, the medicine could no longer conquer. His daughter's eyes, when he had to speak the words that meant the end of hope. When you have seen so much, you learn the language of the soul. And in the eyes of this wild thing, he saw it all. He saw a mind, a deep and knowing intelligence. He saw fear. And beneath it all, something that broke his heart. A fragile, desperate hope the last ember of a fire about to be extinguished. The hunters were only 20 yards away. One lifted his weapon, and Marcus saw the glint of a different kind of ending, a tranquilizer. Before he could breathe, the dart flew, and the creature shuddered, its great body beginning to bow forward into the cold embrace of the creek. In that heartbeat, Marcus made a choice. He couldn't have told you why, my dear. Perhaps it was born from 6 years of solitude, of replaying every choice he'd ever made. Perhaps in that creature's eyes he saw a reflection of his own lonely soul. Or perhaps he was simply a stubborn old man who believed that nothing, not even a myth, deserved to be hunted down. He raised his rifle to the sky and sent a single shot to pierce the heavens. The sound was a thunderclap echoing from the canyon walls. The hunters fell to the earth, their own weapons searching for him. He sent a second shot, a whisper into the bark of a nearby tree, a warning as soft as splintering wood. And from the depths of his memory, he found the voice of the commander he once was, and roared, "You are trespassers here. Leave this place. This is my land." One of the men spoke urgently into his radio, and they began to retreat, their eyes and weapons still fixed on the ghost in the trees. They were professionals, you see. They knew an old man and his rifle were not their true purpose, but they also knew he was a complication, a heart they had not planned to encounter. The beautiful, strange creature was still now the drug, pulling it into a dream. So Marcus fired a third time, a final punctuation, sending a spray of water up from the creek, drawing a line between the hunters and the hunted. My voice, a desperate command, tore through the quiet air. I said, "Leave this place." And the rifle spoke again, its sharp report a final warning. Now. The calculation was a simple, heartbreaking one. They could have overwhelmed me, but the sound of my rifle was a bell summoning the world outside. It would bring questions they couldn't answer about why men like them were hunting a shadow in these woods, the kind of light that unravels secrets and shatters careers. Their leader gave a silent signal, a language of shadows. His partner hesitated for a heartbeat, then agreed. And just like that, they dissolved back into the forest, their retreat swift and soundless. I held my ground, the rifle an extension of my will, until the woods fell silent once more, and for 5 long minutes I listened only to the wild drum of my own heart beating against my ribs, as if it longed to be free. And so, my dear, when he finally drew close to the creek's gentle murmur, he found it there, its great life fading like the last light of dusk. It was larger than his heart had prepared him for, easily 8 feet of profound existence, perhaps even more. A cloak of dark brown fur matted with the creek's cool kiss, and the sacred story of its own blood covered its form. Its face was a beautiful mystery, somewhere between the world of man and the soul of the wild. But its eyes, oh, those eyes held him with a knowing so deep, it stirred the very essence of his being. I found my voice a whisper I hoped could soothe the world itself, the same gentle words I would offer a frightened horse. Easy now. I am here. Easy. And you answered not with words I knew, but with a low, resonant hum that felt like the earth itself speaking. Your hand, so large and yet so gentle, moved with a slow grace toward the pain in your leg, where the cruel sting of their dart remained a thorn buried deep in your strength. With a careful breath, I drew it free. You flinched, a tremor of pure pain, but you did not lash out. A dark, rich blood, deeper in color than my own, bloomed from the wound. I offered the only comfort I had, my flannel shirt stripped from my back and pressed against the flow. And all the while, your intelligent eyes never left mine, a silent, unblinking testament to the trust you were placing in me. I have a sanctuary, I whispered, my voice thick with a promise I had to keep. It's not far from here. Do you think you can walk with me? Perhaps you understood the words, Or perhaps you simply understood the heart behind them, for you tried to rise. You made it halfway before your wounded leg betrayed you. I caught you then, and my friend, the sheer profound weight of you almost brought me to my knees. But together, we found our footing. You leaned on me, your massive arm, a warm, heavy mantle across my shoulders, and I could feel the life heat of you, the wild, earthy scent of the forest clinging to you, and the immense sleeping power in your frame. We managed maybe 10 yards before my own body cried out for mercy. Just a little further. I breathed a prayer to you and to myself. I tried to summon the ghost of the young Marine I once was whispering, "You've carried heavier burdens through far worse places than this." But that young man wasn't 68 years old. He didn't know this ache in the bones, this fire in the back, this crushing weight of all the years gone by. The creek bank was a cruel, steep climb, the mud a greedy thief of my footing, and every single step felt like a final goodbye my body was willing to grant me. And somehow you must have felt my strength failing. You shifted, pushing yourself more upright, taking back some of your own immense weight. And so we climbed together, a weary man and a living legend. Two broken souls finding strength in one another up from that creek and into the sanctuary of the trees. The cabin was only a quarter of a mile away, but it felt like a journey of 10. The world narrowed to a single point before me, and my breath was a ragged, stolen thing. You were struggling just as much, stumbling beside me, and from time to time that deep rumbling sound would rise from your chest, a note of pain perhaps, or encouragement, or maybe just a quiet acknowledgement that our fates were now intertwined. When the clearing finally opened before us, a wave of relief so powerful washed over me that I nearly wept. By some miracle of sheer stubborn will, I guided you up the porch steps and into the warmth of my home. You collapsed by the old wood stove, your great chest rising and falling, your eyes beginning to cloud over as the drug finally claimed its victory. I retrieved my humble first aid kit, just bandages, antiseptic, a needle and thread. I have mended flesh in jungles far from here, my friend. But this was a task on another scale entirely, for a being more impossible than any I had ever known. Your shoulder bore the deeper wound, a cruel landscape of gouges that spoke of their violence. I cleaned it as gently as I could, while you drifted on the edge of awareness. But as I began to stitch the skin, your eyes opened one last time. They found mine with a clarity that pierced my very soul, and then they closed. I will never know if it was trust or acceptance, or simply the final surrender to exhaustion. The work took a full hour. My hands trembled not just from weariness, but from the storm of the morning finally breaking inside me. When I was done, I leaned back against the wall, looked upon you, and a strange laugh escaped my lips. It was the sound a man makes when he feels the earth shift beneath his feet, knowing he has stepped into a new world from which he can never return. I had just tended to the wounds of a Sasquatch, here in the quiet solitude of my own cabin, on an ordinary Tuesday morning while the men who hunted you still combed the whispering woods outside. You slept then, your great chest a gentle tide rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. I found my warmest blanket and draped it over your resting form before moving to the window to keep watch. The forest was quiet for now, but I knew they would return. A treasure like you is not something they would so easily forget. My mind was a whirlwind. I needed to think to find a path forward. But before any of that, I needed coffee. The real strong kind. The kind that feels like an anchor in a storm. I hoped it might bring some clarity to the beautiful madness of the last few hours, though I knew deep down that nothing ever could. Beyond my window, the forest was beginning to sing again. The birds reclaimed their melodies, and a soft wind whispered through the pines, as if the world was trying to pretend the morning had been nothing but a fleeting dream. But you were real. You were still here, your breath a slow and steady tide, your presence filling my home with the scent of blood, of wild earth, and of something ancient and sacred for which my language has no name. I poured my coffee, adding a measure of whiskey because some mornings require a fire within. And then I sat my friend and began to ponder the impossible, how to hide a sacred living myth from the eyes of the United States military. You slept for 18 long hours, a healing slumber. I kept watch for 16 of them, my rifle resting in my lap, my ears tuned to the night for any sound of their return. I must have finally drifted away near dawn because when I opened my eyes, I found yours watching me from across the quiet room. We simply looked at one another in the soft gray light of the new day. The world was still. The fire had died, leaving a chill in the air, and I could see the ghost of my own breath and the mist of yours, too, a slow, steady plume as real and true as anything I have ever known. My voice, when I finally found it, was a rough whisper in the silence. So, you're awake. It was not a question, but a quiet statement of a beautiful fact. You answered with that deep rumble, softer this time, a gentle vibration in the still air. You tried to sit, but a shadow of pain crossed your face and you settled back down. My stitches had held, but the wounds were still angry, a stark crimson against your dark fur. I knew you needed medicine. A healer's touch, but that was a world we could not enter. I rose to my feet, my old joints protesting with a series of sharp cracks, and began the simple ritual of making coffee. My hands knew the motions of familiar dance that gave my racing mind a moment of peace. Here you were, a wounded wonder in my home. Out there, the hunters. And here I was, with no allies, no plan, and no map for this wild new territory of my life. Food. I said the word, feeling small and simple in the vast silence between us. Do you need sustenance? Do you eat what I eat? And then you tilted your head, a gesture so familiar, so deeply human, that it sent a current of wonder through me. I saw it then clear as the morning light, a deep intelligence, a flicker of understanding, or at the very least, the beautiful, earnest attempt to bridge the gulf between our worlds. With a gentle heart, he prepared an offering of 6 scrambled eggs, a pound of fried bacon, and warm toast, carrying the humble feast over on a single plate. My dear. The creature sniffed at it, so tentative at first, then took a piece of bacon between massive fingers that moved with a surprising, delicate grace. It ate with a slow, deliberate rhythm, its ancient eyes never leaving Marcus. My name is Marcus Thompson, he confessed softly, leaning back against the wall with his own meal. I suppose you can't tell me yours, can you, friend? But then, a sound bloomed in the quiet room. It wasn't English, not anything my heart could recognize, but it was a voice intentional and true. A pattern of low rumbles, and what I can only describe as gentle clicks. It repeated this melody twice, patient like a teacher comforting a soul who was slow to learn. Kyle, Marcus whispered, trying to echo the sound. Is that it? Is your name Kyle? And the creature, my dear Kyle, dipped his magnificent head just once. It was an agreement, perhaps an acknowledgement, or maybe just a beautiful coincidence. But for Marcus it was everything. They finished their breakfast in a shared, sacred silence. Kyle found the strength to sit up after eating, leaning his great form against the wall, breathing so carefully around what must have been cracked ribs. The wound on his shoulder was the deepest sorrow. Marcus changed the dressing, cleaning it once more, and tried to ignore how this whole moment felt like a dream. You learn to mend on the battlefield, and you learn it doesn't matter who you are tending to. Flesh is just flesh. Blood is just blood. And pain, my love, pain is a language we all understand. They're going to come back for you. Marcus murmured the words more for his own heart than for Kyle. That team. They put so much into finding you. They're not just going to let you go. Cale's gaze drifted to the window, a portal to the world that hunted him, and then returned to Marcus. There was a universe in that look, my friend. A deep understanding, yes, but also a quiet calculation. This was no simple beast. This was a soul that could think, that could plan, that knew how to survive. How long have they been hunting you? Marcus asked, his voice filled with a gentle sorrow. Kyle held up one of his enormous hands, spreading his fingers wide. He closed it into a fist, and then spread them again. He did this 3 times. 15, Marcus guessed, his heart aching. 15 days. A single solemn nod. Oh, dear God, Marcus breathed, rubbing his face, feeling the 3-day stubble and the weight of it all pulling at him. But why? What could they possibly want from you? But the answer was as clear and as cruel as a winter morning, wasn't it? They wanted proof. They wanted a specimen to put under a microscope, to cut apart, to prove to the world that their myths were real. And knowing the military, they probably wanted to turn him into a weapon. You don't pour that kind of money and manpower into a search unless you see some terrible advantage. The radio on his shelf suddenly crackled to life. It was only static at first, but it was enough to make both their hearts freeze. Marcus kept it tuned to the Forest Service frequency, a habit from years of listening to the ranger's quiet chatter. Now a voice cut through, professional and sharp. Then a voice drifted through the air, a whisper from the world outside, telling a story of a lost soul in Sector 7. It spoke of a man in the winter of his years, his late 60s perhaps, whose heart was in a storm. They spoke with words of caution, a plea for gentleness, asking the world to approach with caution and to understand his pain. "Do not engage directly," the voice repeated, and it sounded less like a command and more like a prayer for a man they had never met. Marcus felt a cold dread settle deep in his soul. They were painting him as a madman, the old hermit who finally lost his mind shooting at ghosts in the trees. It was a clever, cruel story, really. It gave them cover to move in with force, an excuse if things turned ugly. And it meant that no one, not a single soul, would ever believe his story of what he had found. "The bastards," he muttered. Then his eyes found Cale's. "My friend, we have a problem." Cale let out a low rumble, a sound that felt like a solemn vow of agreement. You see, the cabin was never meant to be a fortress, not against a real attack. It was just one room with windows on 3 sides and a door that would surrender to a single good kick. And Marcus, my dear, had maybe 50 rounds of ammunition in the entire world. Enough for a final heartbreaking stand, perhaps, but not enough to win anything. "Can you walk?" he asked Kyle, his voice a hopeful prayer. "Can you travel?" Kyle pushed himself to his feet, a slow and pained movement. He stood there, swaying one hand, braced against the wall for balance. But he was standing. Marcus was 6 feet tall, and Kyle towered over him by at least 2 feet, maybe even more. The magnificent creature had to duck his head to avoid the ceiling beams. "Good," Marcus said, his mind racing now, the Marine training from 50 years ago whispering to him. "That's good. My friend here is what we are going to do." He had an old truck, a Ford F-150, rusted and worn, but with a heart that still beat. It had a camper shell over the bed. If he could just get Cale inside, hidden away, they could move. But where could they possibly go? The logging road only led in one direction, and that was the very path their hunters would take, unless... There was an old fire road, a forgotten path that hadn't been touched in maybe 20 years. It would be overgrown, a challenge for most vehicles. But his Ford had 4-wheel drive and good clearance, and Marcus knew that desperate times called for a leap of faith. That old road would take them higher into the mountains, away from the search grid. It would buy them a little time, a moment to breathe and figure out what came next. "Okay," he said, grabbing what little he could. "We're leaving. We have to leave right now." He threw what he could into a pack, the first aid kit, some food, water, his ammunition matches, all his emergency gear. He left everything else behind. The books he would never finish reading. The faded photos of his dear Linda. The quiet debris of 6 years spent hiding from the world. It should have hurt more leaving it all. But looking at Kyle, seeing those intelligent eyes watching him, trusting him, it felt like the only right thing in the world, as if this was what he was always meant to do, as if all those lonely years had been leading him to this very moment. They made it to the truck, just as the first helicopter appeared over the ridge. It was black, unmarked, a predator moving fast and low against the sky. Marcus helped Kyle into the truck bed, threw a tarp over his great form, and prayed with all his heart that no one would look too closely. The camper shell offered some cover, but it was hardly a perfect hiding place. He turned the key, and the engine caught on the third try, thank God. He pulled out onto the logging road, a rutted, narrow path, with pines crowding in on both sides. In his mirror, he could see dust rising like a ghost behind them, and he could hear the helicopter circling back. They had seen him. My friend, there was no way they hadn't. "Just hold on," he whispered, a promise to the wind, as his foot pressed the accelerator to the floor. The turnoff for the fire road was a fleeting shadow, a secret you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Marcus turned the wheel with a prayer, feeling the truck's brief wild dance on the gravel before the trees folded around us. Branches like skeletal fingers scraped our sides on a path that was barely a path at all. Behind us, I could hear their shouts and the heavy beat of that helicopter descending, trying to pierce the leafy veil that was our only hope. The old truck bucked and groaned over rocks and fallen logs, its suspension crying out in protest. From the back, I heard Kyle's soft grunt of pain, a sound that tore right through Marcus's heart. Oh, how he longed to be gentle, to slow down, but to be slow was to be captured. To be slow was to surrender to whatever darkness those men had planned. He'd made his choice, you see, in that sacred moment. He lifted that beautiful creature from the creek. There was no going back. The road climbed a steep, winding ribbon clinging to the spine of an old ridge. In the dense embrace of the canopy, the helicopter could not follow. He could still hear its angry hum, circling, searching, but the sound was already becoming a memory. We had minutes, perhaps just a few stolen heartbeats before they came for us on foot. My Marcus pushed that truck harder than he ever should have, its engine roaring a defiant song as the heat gauge bled into the red. The road grew wilder, nearly vanishing in places, and twice I felt his heart leap, thinking we were trapped. But the old Ford clawed its way onward, churning mud and spitting gravel, carrying us higher and higher into a land that hadn't known the touch of man for decades. After 20 minutes that felt like an eternity, he cut the engine, and we listened. Only the birds, only the wind, and far below the distant dreaming sound of Thunder Creek. No helicopters, no angry voices, just the vast wild silence of the high country and 2 fugitives finally catching their breath. He slipped out of the cab to check on Cale. The poor thing was so pale beneath his fur, his breath coming in shallow waves, and a fresh bloom of crimson was seeping through the bandages. The brutal ride had torn something open deep inside. "Oh, hell." Marcus breathed the words, a soft apology. "I'm so sorry. We just had to move." Kyle answered with that deep, vibrating rumble that could have meant forgiveness or pain, or maybe both. Marcus reached for the first aid kit again, his hands steadier this time as he began to clean the wounds. Sometimes, my dear, the second fear is a quieter thing than the first. We must have been 15 miles from the cabin, then lost in the deep heart of the Cascade wilderness. There were no roads from here, only the faint whispers of animal trails and a landscape so fierce even the hunters turned back. It was a perfect place to hide, but a perfect place to hide is also a perfect place to die if your luck runs out. "We need a plan," Marcus said softly, his voice a low hum as he worked on the stitches. Something more than just running. They have those helicopters tracking gear ways of seeing in the dark. We can't just keep ahead of them forever. Cale's hand lifted, pointing a silent finger to the north. Then his fingers began a slow, deliberate dance in the air, a language my Marcus had never seen before. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle with a fragile hope. "Your people." That word, people, hung in the air, feeling both strange and profoundly true. Because whatever Kyle was, he was no animal. Animals don't have eyes that hold the wisdom of ages. They don't speak with such graceful gestures. They don't carry themselves with such a deep and knowing soul. Kyle nodded and then held up both his hands, spreading his fingers wide. He did this 2 times, then 3, then 4, 20. Marcus guessed the word, a bridge between their 2 worlds. 20 miles to the north. Another slow, certain nod. 20 miles. Through this untamed country it would take days on foot. And my Marcus wasn't sure if Kyle could walk 20 yards at that moment, let alone 20 miles. But what choice did we truly have? To stay was to wait for the net to close around us. To run blindly was to simply run out of time. So to the north we would go. He helped Kyle from the truck, shouldered his own pack, and took one last long look at the old Ford. It had been a good friend. My Linda had always hated that truck, called it his midlife crisis on wheels. But it had brought us here to this chance. That was enough. They moved into the shelter of the trees, Marcus setting a slow, careful pace with Kyle, limping beside him like a shadow. The forest was an ancient cathedral of giant Douglas firs and cedars that blotted out the sun. The ground soft, with a carpet of needles laid down over centuries, hushed their footsteps. A blessing for silence. A curse for Kyle's pained struggle for purchase. Every 50 yards, Marcus would stop, listen, and search the trail behind them. There was no pursuit yet, but he knew it would come. The world of men never gives up. He had learned that in Vietnam, and he had learned it again when his Linda was dying, and the bills kept coming relentless. No matter how many times he told them, he had nothing left to give. By midday they had traveled maybe 2 miles. Kyle was fading, leaning his weight heavily on Marcus, the wounds beginning to weep again. They needed to stop. They needed to rest. But Marcus pushed them onward with a whisper. Just a little further, just over this ridge, just to that clearing ahead. The clearing, when they reached it, was a sanctuary maybe 50 feet across, encircled by massive, watchful cedars. In its center, a spring bubbled up from between ancient stones, forming a small, perfect pool before spilling away down the mountain. The water was so clear my Marcus could see every pebble resting on the bottom, each one a tiny jewel. "Here," he said, his voice a reverent whisper. "We can rest here." Kyle collapsed more than sat, his breathing ragged and shallow. With hands that shook from a deep and weary ache, Marcus coaxed a small fire to life and made coffee. They had been moving for 6 hours, all of it uphill, and he was 73 years old if he was a day. His body was spent. His will was not far behind. But Kyle looked far worse. The creature's eyes were glazed with a feverish light, and the wounds were oozing a fluid that spoke of sickness taking hold. Perhaps infection, or just the weight of all the trauma finally breaking him. Marcus cleaned the injuries one more time, using the very last of his antibiotics from the kit. It wasn't enough. Nothing he had felt like enough. "Listen," he said quietly, his voice a desperate prayer. "If you have people out there, they need to know where you are. Can you—" "I don't know. Can you call to them?" "Signal, somehow." Kyle looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then, with an effort that seemed to draw from the very heart of the mountain, the creature threw his head back and let out a sound that Marcus felt more than heard. It began as a low rumble that vibrated through the soles of his feet, then climbed and soared into a cry that echoed off the distant peaks. It was not human. It was not animal. It was something else entirely. A sound as lonely and wild and ancient as the trees that stood witness around them. The sound faded, and a profound silence rushed in to fill the space it left behind. My Marcus waited, rifle at the ready, half expecting the roar of helicopters, the crash of tactical teams, or simply the end of everything. But the silence didn't hold my friend. What returned was not an echo, but an answer. From the north, a whisper on the wind, yet clear as a bell. Another call, a song like Kael's, but sung in a different key by a different soul. Then another, a harmony from the east. And a third, so close, perhaps, only a mile or two away, a promise drawing near. And in that moment, Kael's eyes opened, and a light I hadn't seen before, a focus, a strength poured back into him. He fought his way to his feet, swaying like a great tree, but standing tall. And then came that deep rumbling sound from his chest, the one I had come to know as yes, as good, as finally. Your people. I whispered the words, a quiet truth between us. My friend, they're coming for you. But hope, as you know so often, travels with a shadow. Through the cathedral of trees, that terrible rhythmic heartbeat of helicopter rotors cut through the peace. It drew closer, circling above us like a vulture. That beautiful call, a beacon for Kael's family, had also become a lantern for our hunters. A curse fell from my lips, a whisper against the growing noise, as I grabbed my pack. "Can you move?" I pleaded. "Oh, my friend, we have to move." Kael took 2 brave steps, and then faltered. I reached for him, trying to catch a falling mountain. You see, catching 8 feet and 600 pounds of soul is more a thing of spirit than of strength. We tumbled together, a tangle of desperate limbs, my hip crying out against the earth. The sky above us became a storm of its own, making the helicopter a beast, roaring overhead, its blades whipping the trees into a frenzy. And through the torn canopy, my love, I saw its dark belly and a figure leaning out, holding a weapon that could steal a life or a soul, a rifle, a camera, perhaps both. I raised my own rifle, a useless, defiant prayer against the thunder. What could I do, my dear? Shoot the moon from the sky? But the act itself was everything. It was a line drawn not in sand, but in the sacred pine needles of that forest. This far, and no further. It didn't land, it couldn't not in that wild place. But it hung there in the air, a malevolent star, as ropes unfurled like dark vines. 4, maybe 5 figures descended with a chilling purpose. They were the kind of men you send when you believe failure is not a possibility. And then Kael made a sound, but it was different. It wasn't born of pain or of fear. My love, it was a note strung with anticipation, as if he were watching not an ending, but a beginning. And just like that, the forest itself came alive. They flowed from the shadows, my friend, from everywhere at once. Giants walking on 2 feet, moving with a silence that defied their size until the moment for silence had passed. I tried to count them, 6, 8, 10, and then lost the number as they gathered, a silent council of kings. Each one larger than my friend Kael, each one moving with the grace of the tide. The soldiers landed ready for a fight, but you could see it in their eyes, my love, the exact moment all their training became meaningless. Because no manual can ever prepare a man for the truth of the Sasquatch. More than one. Surrounding you, moving with a fluid power that something so immense simply shouldn't possess. One of the men fired. I saw the dart find the shoulder of a female. At least her grace felt female to me. She simply plucked it out, regarding it with the mild irritation one might give a mosquito, and continued her advance. He fired again, but this time with the speed of a serpent's strike, she caught the dart from the air and sent it back to him. It found his thigh, and his cry was a sharp, broken thing. I could hear the team leader shouting into his radio as they retreated to the ropes, his men covering one another, disciplined even in their fear. But the great beings didn't follow. They simply formed a silent living wall around the clearing, a circle of protection around Kyle and me. Watching. Waiting. Their stillness spoke more loudly than any threat. This ground is sacred, and you will come no further. The helicopter clawed its way upward, ropes trailing uselessly below, carrying one of their own lost to his own medicine. And through that open door I saw him, a man with a camera capturing it all. Proof, my dear. The kind of truth that could shatter the world as we know it. Or so I thought, my friend. It would have if it had ever seen the light of day. Then one of them, the largest, a great patriarch with silver woven through his dark fur like moonlight, lifted his hand. And as one they raised their heads to the sky and sang. It was Kyle's call, but a chorus now, a symphony of voices so profound it vibrated in my very bones and brought tears to my eyes for reasons my soul understood, but my mind could not name. The helicopter shuddered in the air, wobbling as if caught in a storm that wasn't there. The rotors fought an invisible tide. I could see the pilots struggling as the aircraft began to spin, losing its war against the music of the earth. It broke free, but only just limping away to the south and trailing what looked like smoke. But you know, I don't think it was smoke. I think, my dear, we were seeing the echo of their song, a visible memory left hanging in the air. And when the last whisper of the engine was gone, they lowered their heads. The silence that fell then was a holy thing, so complete that even the wind held its breath. The silver-backed elder walked toward me. My hands, guided by old fears, brought the rifle up, but I forced them down again. What was I to do? Raise a weapon against my saviors, against the souls who had answered Kyle's prayer? He stopped just 5 feet from me. And this close, my love, I could see the story of his life etched upon him, the scars, the silver at his muzzle, the profound weight of ages in his eyes. This was a king who had walked this earth forever, hunted by a world that could not decide if it wanted his image or his life. Then Kyle spoke to him in that language of rolling thunder and soft clicks. The elder listened with a deep stillness, his gaze shifting to me before he answered. I could not translate their words, but I could feel their current. Kyle was telling our story, and I knew, my friend, that in the heart of that conversation the fate of my own life was being held. At last, the elder turned his whole being to face me. His eyes were ancient and saw everything. They saw the rifle, the years on my face, the weariness in my soul. They saw whatever it is one must see in the heart of a man before offering trust. And then, my love, he reached out with one great weathered hand. He held it open, palm to the sky. The meaning was as clear as the stars. I stared at that hand for what felt like a lifetime. I thought of Linda and of my daughter who no longer calls. I thought of 6 lonely years in a cabin believing my story had ended. I thought of the choice I made by the water and the promise I had been keeping with every breath since. So I took his hand. His grip was so careful, my friend, almost tender, but beneath it I could feel a power that could unmake me without a thought. He squeezed my hand just once, a silent promise, then let go and gave a slow, deep nod. And just like that, a new path began to unfold. They lifted Kyle as if he were made of air, 2 of them, a living cradle for his wounded form. The elder simply looked at me, a silent gesture to follow, and so I did. We moved northward, flowing through a landscape that should have been impossible, and I followed my love, because what other choice did my heart have? For 3 days, we were pilgrims in that wild cathedral. They moved with a grace my old body could barely match, even when they slowed their river-like pace for me. We would only stop when I could go no further, and then just for a handful of hours. They fed me from the forest's own pantry berries and roots my mind didn't know but my body welcomed. They gave me water from streams so cold it made my teeth ache with life. And in that time I began to learn their language, not of words but of intent, of the quiet truth that lived beneath the sounds. To watch Kyle heal was like watching spring return to the world. The simple stitches I'd made held fast as his wounds began to close. By the second day he was walking on his own, and by the third he moved with the forest's own rhythm again. Whatever life force they possess, my dear, it is a powerful and swift healer. On the evening of the third day we came to the place. There are no words in our language for it, my love. It was a village woven into the world itself. Structures of branch and moss so perfectly a part of the landscape you could walk by them 1,000 times and never see. A waterfall sang its endless song, and caves in the cliffs offered deep shelter. And everywhere there was life, little ones playing, adults moving with quiet purpose, elders sitting watching with eyes that held more history than all my books combined. They created a sanctuary for him, my friend. It wasn't quite a home within their circle, but it wasn't the lonely world outside either. It was a space held in reverence for a cherished guest, or a soul seeking refuge, or maybe simply for an old man who had made his final choice, and these beautiful creatures in their infinite grace honored that choice and gave him a place to finally rest. Kale brought me food that evening. It was a true meal, a stew of some kind with meat and tubers that tasted of the earth. It was good. It was better than anything I had eaten in months. "Thank you," I whispered, knowing Kale wouldn't understand the sounds, but hoping he would feel the shape of the words in my heart. He answered with a low rumble, a sound like the shifting of ancient stones. He gestured south to the world I'd come from, then to me, then to himself. The meaning was as clear as the mountain air. "You gave me my life, and I have brought you to safety. The debt is paid, except it wasn't, and I knew it." All I had given Kyle was a few more days. What these creatures were giving me was something else entirely. A purpose, perhaps. A reason. The very thing I had been missing since my Linda died, since my daughter's calls stopped coming, since the silence in my cabin became too heavy to carry alone. That night, lying in the shelter they had made for me, I listened to the sounds of the tribe settling into sleep. The rustle of the young ones quieting, the soft murmurs of the adults, the deep, slow breathing of the old ones. It reminded me of something, a feeling from a lifetime ago. My unit back in Vietnam. Those rare, quiet nights at base camp when the war held its breath, when no one was dying, and we could all just be. That feeling of belonging to something larger than yourself. The quiet knowledge that these people had your back and you had theirs, and that was all that truly mattered. I thought I had lost that feeling forever on the day my Linda died. It turns out my love, I had just been looking for it in the wrong place. The world I left behind came looking for me 1 week later. I was helping to mend one of the woven shelters. My hands are not what they once were, but they remember the feeling of work when I heard the helicopters, 3 of them this time flying in a cold, systematic pattern. Hunting. The tribe heard them too. In a heartbeat, the village vanished into the forest. The young ones disappeared into the caves. The adults became silent guardians at key points, some holding stones, others just their own immense fists. The elders gathered by the waterfall, their low tones weaving decisions in the mist. The silver-backed leader, I had started calling him Tyler in my mind, though I knew not his real name, approached and beckoned for me to follow. We climbed to a vantage point, where the valley lay open below us, and we could see the helicopters meticulously working their grid. Tyler made a few simple gestures. He pointed at the helicopters, then at me, then back south, towards the cities of men. His question needed no words. "They are looking for you. What What shall we do? I watched those machines cut through the sky for a long time. I knew I could leave. I could walk out, turn myself in, tell them the story of an old hermit who had a breakdown. They would evaluate me, maybe I'd spend some time in a VA hospital, and eventually I would be released. I would go back to what was left of my cabin, back to the silence, the empty rooms, and the slow countdown to the end. Or I could stay. I could help these people, and they were people of that. I had no doubt stay hidden, stay safe. I could use the darkness of my past to protect their future. I could trade the last lonely years of my life for something that mattered. I can help, I said to Tyler, my voice quiet. I knew the words were only air to him, but I hoped he could hear my heart. I know how they think, how they search. I can help you stay hidden. Tyler studied me with those ancient knowing eyes. Then he gave a single slow nod before turning and heading back down into the village. Over the next few days, I became something of a watchman and an advisor. My knees wouldn't let me range far, but my mind could see the patterns in their hunt. The helicopters flew at dawn and dusk when their heat-seeing eyes worked best. The ground teams moved by day, following the paths of water and animals. Their command post was south, I knew, likely near the ashes of my old home. They were thorough professional, and they would not give up easily. But I had one advantage they couldn't plan for. I used to be one of them. I knew that mindset. I knew that even the best-laid plans get weary after a week of finding nothing. I knew that soldiers get tired, that contractors get bored, and that eventually someone far away would look at the cost and ask if chasing a ghost was worth it. I taught the Sasquatch to hear the different heartbeats of the aircraft. I showed them how to read the invisible lines of the search patterns to know where the hunters would go next. They learned faster than any men I had ever trained, and they taught me in return. They taught me how to move through the woods without leaving a single sign of my passing, how to read the weather in the touch of the wind, how to speak across miles using sounds that were not a language, but carried a world of meaning all the same. Kyle became my friend. We couldn't talk, not in any way most would understand, but we understood each other perfectly. He would sit with me in the evenings as we watched the valley, and he would make those deep rumbling sounds that might have been stories of his people. In return, I would tell him my own stories about you, my Linda, about the war, and about the daughter whose voice I missed so dearly. The words didn't matter. The sharing was everything. On the 10th day, the air changed. The helicopters stopped their endless circling. The ground teams pulled back. From my high perch, I watched as the military presence in the valley shrank, gathered itself, and then withdrew. By evening, they were gone. I waited 3 more days just to be sure. Then I told Tyler that I needed to go south to scout the land and make certain the threat had truly passed. Tyler shook his great head. His hands spoke a language I now knew well, dangerous, unnecessary. You stay here. I need to see. I insisted, my voice gentle but firm. I need to know if it's really over. We went back and forth, his silent gestures against my human stubbornness, until finally he relented. But he sent 2 others with me, younger males, fast and strong, who could carry me away if the world went wrong. We traveled by moonlight, covering in mere hours what had taken me days to walk alone. By dawn, we were near the old logging road, close to where I had abandoned my truck. The ford was gone, taken by the world I had left behind. But the tracks in the dirt were still there, and they were telling a story. The earth itself bore the scars of their passage, the heavy tracks of multiple vehicles pressed into the soil. They had set up a temporary world here, lived in it for a while, and then vanished. He found the ghosts they left behind, hollow shell casings, likely from training exercises, the discarded wrappers from their strange packaged meals, and the faint grid of a command tent, an almost erased drawing in the dirt. But they had built nothing to last. No watchful towers, no hidden posts, no silent listening machines. It was clear they had come seeking something searched with all their might and found only echoes. Their hunt was over, at least for this season of his life. My dear friend, imagine Marcus standing on the ghost of his driveway, gazing at the ghost of his home. The cabin's bones were still standing, but its soul had been torn out. Everything he had cherished, every small piece of his life, his beloved books, the captured moments of Linda's smile in photographs, the simple collected treasures of 6 years, lay scattered and broken, a testament to a violation that had rendered it all meaningless. He waited for the familiar sting of anger, the hollow ache of loss, but found only a quiet calm settling over him. Standing there with his 2 silent guardians waiting in the trees, all he felt was an overwhelming sense of release. That chapter was closed, and it had been the very moment his rifle had sung its defiant song over the creek. There was no path leading back, even if his heart had wanted to find one. From the wreckage of that life, he rescued a single memory, a photograph of his Linda, captured by the sea, perhaps 10 years ago. Her head was thrown back in a moment of pure joy, her hair a wild flag in the wind. He gently slipped this piece of his heart into his pocket and turned away, leaving the ruins behind without a second glance. The young ones led him northward once more, their pace quicker now that the shadow had passed. They moved through a world so breathtakingly beautiful it made his soul ache when he dared to truly see it. Ancient forests that had never known the bite of a saw, meadows painted with flowers for which he had no names, and peaks crowned with the white of August snow. This, he thought, was the world, as it was first intended, a world before us, or perhaps a world that would remain long after. When they arrived at the sanctuary of the village, Tyler was waiting as if he always had been. The elder's ancient eyes met his, and in a moment of profound silence, everything was understood. The old life had burned away to ash. The new one, whatever it held, had just been born. That evening, a quiet joy settled over them, not a boisterous celebration, but a deep shared breath of acknowledgement. The tribe had weathered another storm. Marcus had chosen their path as his own. And these simple truths, my friend, were more than enough reason to mark the moment. They lit a great fire, a rare and precious beacon against the dark, a risk he knew against the eyes in the sky. The little ones danced in its flickering light, their playful wrestling a beautiful wild ballet. The adults shared sustenance and spoke in those deep resonant tones, while the elders sat in their circle, their soft chants like prayers or songs or simply the collected wisdom of beings who had watched empires rise and fall. Then Kyle approached him, his large hands surprisingly gentle, offering a gift. It was a necklace, a thing of beauty crafted from carved wood, smooth stones, and what looked to be the claws of some magnificent beast. He gestured for Marcus to wear it, and when he did, a low, approving rumble echoed from deep within Kyle's chest. "What does this mean?" Marcus whispered the question more for his own heart than for Kyle, for he knew words were not the way of his friend. But then Tyler came near his movements, a slow and deliberate dance. He pointed to the necklace, then to Marcus, and then his hand swept out to encompass the entire tribe gathered by the fire. The message resonated deeper than words. You are part of this circle now. Not one of them, no, but no longer an outsider. You are something else entirely, something new. Marcus's fingers traced the necklace, feeling not just its physical weight, but the gravity of the life he had chosen, the promise he had made, the bridge he had turned to ash behind him. At 73 years old, he knew his remaining seasons were few, perhaps 10, if the fates were kind, maybe only 5 if they were not. He could have let them fade away alone in a silent cabin, a slow surrender to the end. Or he could live them here with these impossible, wonderful people and be a part of something that truly mattered. In the quiet truth of his soul, he knew there had never been a choice at all. And so the world turned as it always does. Summer's golden light softened into the amber of autumn, which in turn gave way to the deep white silence of winter. The snows arrived early that year, a heavy and determined blanket, and the tribe retreated to their winter homes, ancient caves nestled deep in the mountains, shielded from the world's fury. Marcus went with them, his few belongings on his back, learning to read the story of the land just as they did. Oh, that winter was a harsh teacher. It spoke to the arthritis in his bones and tested his lungs with the thin, sharp air. There were days, wrapped in the biting cold, when doubt whispered to him, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. But those days were fleeting, like clouds across the sun, and the good days always returned to warm him. He found his purpose in teaching the young ones. Not with words, for their language was their own beautiful mystery, but with the concepts of his world. He taught them the scent of man, the sound of his machines, the unnatural glint of a hidden camera. He gave them the sad wisdom they would need to survive should the soldiers or the hunters ever return. And in return, they gave him a gift beyond measure. They taught him more than how to survive in the wild. They taught him a new way to be. They taught him the language of patience, of thinking, in the long, slow rhythm of generations, not fleeting years. They planned for the world their great-grandchildren would inherit, not for the needs of next week. It was a profound and humbling peace, a wisdom our world has long forgotten. Sometimes his thoughts would drift to Sarah, and he would wonder what she would make of this life he had chosen. He imagined her thinking he had finally lost his way, and perhaps he had. But this quiet belonging, this deep sense of purpose, felt nothing like madness. Madness was the 6 years he'd spent alone whispering to photographs and waiting for a telephone that had forgotten his name. By the heart of winter, Kyle was whole again, his wounds faded into memory, visible only if you knew the story behind them. He was a force of nature once more, disappearing on hunts for days at a time. And yet he always returned to Marcus, bringing small treasures from his journeys, a piece of quartz that caught the light, an offering of food, or sometimes just the gift of his silent, steady presence. It felt like the love of a son, a bond he'd only ever dreamed of, the kind you wish for, if only the world were a kinder place. Spring, when it finally arrived, was a promise whispered on the wind. The snows wept into surging streams, and the world turned green again. The tribe moved back to their summer lands, and Marcus made the journey with them. He was slower, his steps more measured, but he made it. His body was a fading map of the man he once was. He could feel it in 1,000 little surrenders. But his spirit, my friend, his purpose was an unshakable mountain, and that had to count for something. Then, on a warm afternoon in May, the sky broke its silence with the sound of returning helicopters. They were not the birds of war this time, but something else marked with the symbols of the other world. News crews, he guessed, or men who made films. They kept their distance, circling like vultures of curiosity, their glass eyes staring from afar, hungry for a story. Tyler gathered his people, and in the quiet that followed, a decision was made with no words at all. It was time to disappear again, to melt back into the heart of the wild, farther than ever from the reach of man. And Marcus, he knew. He knew with the certainty of aching bones and a weary heart that this was a journey his body could no longer make. The paths ahead were too steep, the miles too many. He had reached the end of his own trail. As twilight painted the mountains, he sat with Tyler, the words catching in his throat as he tried to explain the truth his body had already told him. The old one simply listened with those patient, knowing eyes, and then made the gentle sign that said, "We already know." "I can stay near the edge," Marcus pleaded, his voice soft. I can be your eyes. I can watch for them. I can still be of use to you." But Tyler, with a gentleness that was heartbreaking, slowly shook his head. His hands spoke a language of their own. "Your part in the journey is done. It is time to rest. There is a place prepared for you." The place they had made for him was a haven, a series of caves about 5 miles from their heart, close enough to be remembered but far enough to be safe. It held fresh water, a clear view of the valley, and shelter from any storm. For 2 days they filled it with care, bringing him all he would need, turning cold stone into a warm and final home. After the others had gone, Kyle remained for 1 more day. They sat together at the mouth of the cave, 2 friends watching the sun bleed its final colors across the sky, sharing a silence that was more full than any conversation. At last, Kyle rose and placed a massive hand on Marcus's shoulder, a touch of impossible gentleness. And from his deep chest came a sound that held all the words that could never be spoken, a farewell, a promise, and a thank you all in one. And just like that, my friend Kyle melted into the forest, vanishing as softly as a wisp of smoke. Once more, my dear Marcus found himself in solitude. But this loneliness, you see, was different. It was a sacred vigil. He had a purpose now, a quiet guardian standing at the threshold of 2 worlds, and every few days one of the gentle giants would drift by. Sometimes Kyle, sometimes another, their silent visits, a gift of food and reassurance, a tender check on his well-being. Summer bled into the golden hues of another autumn, marking his 2nd year among them. His body, my love, was a fading melody, his lungs a softer breath, his joints a stiffer dance, his heart an unsteady rhythm, yet his mind remained a brilliant, unwavering light. He watched always. He filled the pages of a journal not for the world to see, but because some truths are so precious, they must be written into memory. He wrote of their world, my dear, of the beautiful tapestry of their lives, the way they spoke without words, the gentleness with which they raised their young. He wrote of their sacred bond with the earth, how they moved through the wild like a flowing river, leaving no trace, taking only what was given. He poured onto the page his awe for their deep hearts, their brilliant minds, and the pure, unshielded way they felt joy and sorrow and love. And in those quiet moments, he penned the story of his own heart's journey, from the crushing silence of a lonely cabin to the warm embrace of this cave, this unexpected family, from a soul simply waiting for the end to one given a reason to greet the dawn. He wrote of how he went from a man who thought his world had shrunk to nothing, to discovering that it held and had always held everything that truly mattered. But then, my friend, the outside world returned a cold shadow in November. They came back with more men, more machines, a harder resolve. About 10 miles to the south, they built a new camp, a scar on the land, bringing with them eyes that could see in the dark, and ears that could hear a leaf fall, and who knows what other cold magic. My Marcus watched them from afar, his old eyes tracing their cold, calculated movements, his pen scratching down every detail. And when his dear Kyle came by a silent shadow on a supply run, Marcus shared all he knew. The great being looked upon the sketches, his deep gaze understanding, and listened as Marcus spoke, a low rumble of acknowledgement in his chest. Then he vanished into the north, a messenger carrying a vital warning, and so the people of the forest faded into true silence. No fires warmed their nights. No sounds betrayed their steps. They scattered like seeds on the wind into small families, finding refuge in caves and the deepest woods until they were like ghosts, impossible to find. And Marcus, my dear, kept his lonely watch, his heart holding a fragile hope that the intruders would simply tire and leave them in peace once more. But they did not leave. The long, cold winter settled in, and still they remained their presence, a stubborn professional weight upon the land. Marcus could see it, the way their search was changing, growing smarter. They had learned from before. This time their intent was a sharp and serious thing. When January's chill bit deepest, a certainty settled in Marcus's heart. He had to do something. The invisible net was closing around their winter sanctuary. Though they had found nothing yet, he knew it was only a breath away. The search was a slow, tightening knot, so smart, so patient, so terribly thorough. For 3 long days he sat with this truth. He turned it over in his mind, weighing every path, every cost. He asked his soul what he had left to give, and what precious peace that final gift might purchase. He wondered, my love, if the fading light of one old man's life was a fair trade for 20 or 30 or even more of these beautiful souls to remain unseen, to remain safe. The equation itself was simple, my dear. It was the heart's surrender to it that was the hardest part. He waited for a February morning crisp and clear as glass. He packed a small bag, just a few things, and his journal, his heart's confession. He left in the cave, weighted with stones, a secret to be kept, or perhaps one day to be found. And then, my love, he began to walk south toward the hum of the world he'd left behind, toward the final choice he had to make. The journey took him 2 full days, each step a battle against his own failing body. His lungs were fire, his chest a vice, his legs trembled with the effort, but still he pressed on. You see, old Marines have a stubbornness in their bones. They don't know how to surrender, even when it might be the wisest thing to do. Just a mile from their camp, he finally stopped to let his heart quiet. He drew a long, ragged breath. From his old kit, he pulled the flare gun, a relic of a past life. He fired a single shot of brilliant orange, a fleeting star against the heavy gray sky. And then, my dear, he simply sat upon the cold earth and waited. They found him quickly, 6 figures moving with a chilling grace, their weapons held at the ready as they encircled him in a perfect, practiced formation. He kept his hands where they could see them, a statue of surrender, and simply let them do what they came to do. The man in charge spoke his name like a question. Marcus Thompson. That's me. He whispered, his voice rough from the cold. Sir. The soldier said, his voice softening just a little. We've been searching for you. There are people who have been so worried. A dry, humorless laugh almost escaped Marcus's lips. I can only imagine, he murmured. They brought him back to their camp, offering him warm coffee and the careful attention of a medic. He was a whisper of his former self, parched, starved, and frozen to the bone. The medic told him he was lucky to be alive, and Marcus, well, he let him believe it. He knew luck had played no part in this at all. Their questions were professional, of course, a gentle but persistent search for truth. They wanted to know the secrets of his absence, the things he'd seen, if the whispers of the forest were real. But my Marcus, he gave them only shadows. He spoke of being lost, his mind clouded, weaving tales of a lonely life in a forgotten mine, surviving on berries and fish. He let them paint their picture of a crazy old man lost to the wilderness and his own mind. I don't think they truly believed him. But what could they do? There was no proof, no one else to ask. Just this quiet old man who had somehow survived 2 impossible winters and whose eyes held stories he would never tell. After 3 days, they took him to a hospital in Missoula. And that's when his Sarah finally came. My dear. She looked older to him, her face etched with that unique anger that is born from a heart terrified and relieved all at once, the fury you feel for someone you were so afraid of losing. In God's name, Dad, what were you thinking? She asked, her voice tight, standing there in that sterile room with her arms crossed over her heart. I was thinking, Marcus said, his voice so soft that it was finally time for me to do something that mattered. You could have died out there, she she whispered, her anger cracking. "You almost did. The doctors, they said—" "I know what they said," he answered, his tone gentle but unbreakable. "My love, I'm 74 years old. I have maybe a year left in this world, perhaps not even that. How I choose to live out my last days, that has to be my own." And that's when she finally broke, my dear. The tears came, real and deep tears she hadn't shed at her own mother's funeral, or when he'd let go of their family home. He just held her hand, a silent anchor in her storm, and in that touch he felt the profound weight of all the years, all the unspoken things that lay between a father and a daughter. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into the quiet of the room, "that I wasn't a better father to you. You were always fine, my love. It was I who was distracted by the children, the work, this life." She gently wiped a tear away. "Oh, I should have called you so much more. My dear, I think we both have a long list of things we wish we'd done differently." For a precious hour, they truly talked, perhaps for the first time since the days of her girlhood. She painted a picture of her life for him, her beautiful kids, her job, the quiet heartbreak of a divorce he never knew had happened. He in turn shared what truths he could not. The ancient secret of the woods, for that was his alone to carry to the end, but of the profound loneliness, the cabin that held him, the feeling that his story was already over. "Is it?" she whispered, her voice so soft. "Is it really over?" His thoughts drifted to the gentle weight of Kyl's hand on his shoulder, to Tyler's quiet nod of acceptance. He saw the tribe, a family gathered in the firelight. He remembered the journal tucked into the earth's embrace, his legacy for a people who had no need for written words, but who might one day need the wisdom held within them. "No," he murmured. "Not quite yet, my love." For 2 long weeks, the hospital walls were his world. They ran their tests and offered their medicines, trying to piece him back together. His heart, they said with gentle voices, was failing, congestive heart failure, a serious but manageable path with the right care. His lungs held the whisper of what was to come. His joints ached with the memory of 1,000 miles. The list of his body's quiet goodbyes went on. "You must be gentle with yourself now," his doctor said kindly. "No more grand adventures in the wilderness. Stay close to town near us. You still have time, my friend, but you must be wise with it." And Marcus nodded, agreeing to it all, signing his name where they asked. He accepted dear Sarah's offer to stay with her, to let her loving hands care for him. He played the part of the hermit, returned, mending his life piece by piece. But beneath his gown, he kept the necklace hidden against his skin. He held the memories close to his heart. He carried the knowledge of what waited in those mountains and of the precious thing he still had to protect. 3 months later, on a soft May morning when the world was looking the other way, Marcus Thompson walked out of Sarah's house in Missoula, slipped into a taxi, and asked the driver to take him home to the mountains. "Where to in all that wilderness?" the driver asked with a kind smile. "As far as this road will take us," Marcus whispered. "And then just a little bit further." The driver took him to the very end of the logging road, that same dusty path where this whole story had begun 18 months before. Marcus paid him with most of the money he had left, shouldered the pack he had so carefully prepared, and with a steady heart, he started walking. His body protested every single step. The medicine helped, but it could not turn back the river of time. He was older, weaker, and so much closer to the end. But his purpose burned as bright as ever. The tribe was still out there. The journal was still safe in the cave. And someone had to make sure the world of men did not return. Someone had to watch over the watchers. It took him 4 days to reach the cave. 4 days of moving like a prayer, resting often and breathing through a pain that was now his constant companion. But he made it. And when he arrived, the cave was waiting just as he had left it in his memory. except, my dear, for the gifts that had been left for him. Someone, it had to be his dear Kyle, had been tending to his home. There was fresh water in hollowed gourds, dried meat and sweet berries and firewood, stacked with such loving care. A new blanket woven from a fiber Marcus had never seen was laid out for him. He settled in, making himself as comfortable as his tired body would allow, and picked up his journal. He began to write again, pouring onto the pages what he had learned in the hospital, what the military had asked, what they knew or only suspected. It was all information that might be a shield for his friends someday. On the second evening, Kyle came. He appeared at the mouth of the cave as if he had never been gone, carrying more gifts, and from his chest came that deep rumble that Marcus knew meant hello. "And I am so glad you are alive, and welcome home, my friend." They sat together as the sun set a man and a Sasquatch impossible friends in a world that could never understand. Kyle would rumble his questions, and Marcus would answer with his hands and the few precious sounds he knew. Back and forth their hearts spoke, re-establishing the connection that time could not break. Finally, Kyle gestured toward Marcus's chest, to the slight bulge in his pocket where the medicines lay. He made a sound that was a question, soft and full of concern. "Yes," Marcus said with a soft sigh. "I'm dying. It's official this time. They said I have maybe 6 months, perhaps a year if I'm lucky and I rest." He let out a quiet laugh. "I'm not planning on resting." Kyle rumbled something long and beautifully complex. Marcus only caught one word in every 5 sorrow time gratitude family, but the love in it was unmistakable. The beautiful creature was saying goodbye, even as he sat right there, acknowledging the truth, accepting it, and grieving while there was still precious time to grieve together. "Me too," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Me too, my friend." The months that followed my love were the very best of Marcus Thompson's life. It's a strange thing to say about the time you are dying, but it was true. He lived in his cave, a quiet guardian of the valley, filling his journal with his final thoughts. Kyle visited every few days, and other members of the tribe would appear like gentle spirits bringing supplies and offering a companionship that went far beyond words. He watched the seasons turn one last time. Spring bled into summer, and summer faded into the gold of fall. His body continued its slow surrender, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in years. He had a purpose. He had a connection. He had found his meaning. The military sent a few patrols through the woods in August, but their search was half-hearted, and they found nothing. Marcus watched them from his hidden place, making notes, passing information to Kyle. The tribe stayed safe, hidden in the heart of the forest. That was all that mattered. By October, Marcus knew the end was a gentle breath away. The pain in his chest was a constant companion now, a fire that the medicine could no longer quiet. His breath was short, a shallow tide, and his heart beat a wild, irregular rhythm. He ate very little. The taste of food was a distant memory, and his body no longer had any use for it. It was on a crisp, late October morning that Tyler came to him, a silent offering of presents against the chill. The old silverback, a venerable elder, eased his great frame into the mouth of the cave, a tight fit he managed with grace, and for a whole hour he simply sat beside Marcus. No words were needed between them, not a single attempt to bridge the quiet. They just shared the space, the air, the steady rhythm of their breathing. And when Tyler finally rose to leave, his touch on Marcus's shoulder was as gentle and familiar as Kyle's had always been. It felt like a blessing, my friend, or perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of their shared journey. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the profound respect one old soul pays to another, reaching across the vast, silent canyon between their worlds. From that day on, Kyle was a constant presence, a faithful shadow. He would appear each day sometimes with offerings of food that Marcus's body could no longer accept. Other times, he would simply sit in quiet vigil as Marcus drifted in and out of sleep. And then there were the moments he would fill the cave with those deep, resonant rumbles, sounds so intricate, you couldn't tell if they were ancient stories or the most sacred of prayers. Then came the 3rd of November. Marcus awoke in the pre-dawn stillness and felt a change deep within his bones. He felt light, almost weightless, as if the earth had finally loosened its hold on him. For the first time in so many months, the ache in his chest was gone, and his breath came as easily as a sigh. Oh, he knew what this feeling was. It was the body's final gentle gift, that quiet moment of peace before the long struggle is over. So he sat at the edge of his small world, watching the sky bleed from deepest black to softest gray, and then ignite into gold. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath with him. And right there, a constant anchor, sat Kyle, a mountain of warmth and unending patience beside him. He finally broke the silence, his voice a soft whisper. "Tell them," Marcus murmured, not knowing if the words would ever truly be understood. "Please tell them to stay hidden, to keep themselves safe. This world, it isn't ready for them. And maybe, my friend, it never will be." In response, a low, gentle rumble vibrated from Kyle's chest, and his enormous hand came to rest upon Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of pure, unspoken understanding. And then the sun crested the ridge, spilling light that was so bright, so pure and beautiful, it felt like a new beginning. In that light, Marcus's mind drifted to Linda, to his dear Sarah, and to all those years he had let slip by in solitude. He thought of that single life-altering choice he made by the creek, the one that brought him to this very moment. And you know what? There were no regrets. He understood then that some choices are born from the mind and others from the heart. But the truest ones, the ones that define us, they come from that deep, quiet place inside that just knows what truly matters. He felt it then, a sharp bloom of pain in his chest, spreading like wildfire. The beautiful lightness began to fray at the edges, turning to shadow. His breath hitched a fragile stutter in the morning air, and then it simply ceased. The very last thing Marcus Thompson ever saw was the face of his friend Cale, those wise, ancient eyes filled with a sorrow that looked so much like grief. The last sound he heard was that deep rumble now, a soft, mournful lament that was so achingly human. And the last thing he felt was the gentle weight of the necklace against his heart, and with it the profound, peaceful certainty that he had done something that truly mattered. And then there was only silence, a deep and final peace. It was the end, yes, but it felt so much like a new beginning. For 3 long days and nights, Kyle remained by his side, a steadfast guardian. He kept the wild things at bay, holding a silent vigil, mourning in the profound, unknowable way of his people. On the 3rd day, he tenderly wrapped Marcus in the worn blanket, lifted him as if he weighed nothing, and carried him away deeper into the heart of the wild. His people gathered in a sacred place, a sanctuary that no human eye had ever or would ever behold. They had their own rituals for passage ceremonies passed down through countless generations, and they performed them all for Marcus Thompson, the old soldier who had saved one of their own, and in doing so had found a place in their hearts. They laid him to rest on a ridge, with a view that stretched out over the entire valley, a place where his spirit could watch over them forever. Beside him, Kyle gently placed the journal, now carefully wrapped in soft leather and fur. His knowledge was now preserved, his incredible story told, his final witness born. Over his resting place, they built a cairn stone by river stone, And Tyler the wise elder placed the final one atop the mound, a piece of pure quartz that captured the sunlight and scattered 1,000 tiny rainbows across the face of the mountain. And then as one, the tribe let out a single unified call, a sound that echoed not just for miles, but through the very corridors of time. It was a farewell, a thank you, and a sacred promise to always remember. Then, just as quietly as they had gathered, they melted back into the wilderness, dissolving into myth, once more becoming legend. They returned to hiding as they always had, and to surviving as they always would. Forever protected by the deep silence of the mountains and by the precious secret of an old man who had chosen them above all else. In the years that followed, hikers would sometimes tell stories about that part of the Cascades. They'd speak of strange, echoing calls they couldn't place, and find tracks in the mud that belonged to no animal they knew. They'd swear they saw fleeting glimpses of giant shapes moving through the trees there one moment and gone the next, before their eyes could even make sense of it. The Forest Service would send someone out every now and then, of course. They never found anything definitive. They'd file reports that just gathered dust on a shelf, and the world, as it always does, simply moved on, chasing new headlines, new fears, new certainties. But up there in the mountains, my friend, in those secret hidden places, the tribe endured. They told the story of the old human who came to live with them, the one who gave the last year of his life to ensure their safety. Their little ones would learn his name, or their own version of it. And through his story, they learned that the impossible can sometimes happen, that the great divide between two worlds can with love be crossed. And they say that sometimes on nights when the wind blows just right, if you were to stand on that ridge where Marcus rests and just listen, you could hear it. A sound that isn't quite a song and isn't quite speech. It is ancient and wild and yet somehow deeply comforting. It's a reminder that this world of ours is still full of mystery, that some secrets are worth more than gold, and that love, loyalty, and sacrifice are feelings that know no bounds of species or language, or even understanding. You see, Marcus Thompson had come to these mountains seeking a lonely end. But instead he found a profound reason to live and a family to be with when he died. His daughter would never know this beautiful, impossible truth. The official story was that he was lost to the wilderness, his body never found, and maybe, just maybe, that was for the best. Some truths, my friend, are simply too vast for the small world we think we know, but his journal is still there, resting with him, a silent testament for some soul to find perhaps centuries from now. And his tribe remains, carrying on from one generation to the next, forever sheltered by the silence, by the mountains, and by the enduring memory of one old man who made the right choice when it mattered most. The sun slips behind the Cascades, just as it always has, painting the peaks in hues of gold and violet, before surrendering them to the night. And in that velvet darkness, intelligent eyes are watching. Massive, silent forms glide between the ancient trees, and somewhere deep in that wild country, the beautiful echo of Marcus Thompson's legacy breathes on. It's not a legacy you'll find carved in stone or pinned on a uniform or filed away in some dusty record. No, it lives in the quiet survival of a people the world says shouldn't exist, but who are as real as the mountains themselves. It lives in a secret faithfully kept and a promise forever honored. It lives in that magical space between myth and truth where all the very best stories are born. And that, my dear friend, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.